Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford weren't just stars of Hollywood's golden age. They were legends whose names still echo decades later. But to really understand the intense rivalry and outright hatred Greta had for Joan, we need to first see who these women were beyond the glitz and glamour. Greta Garbo was the epitome of mystery and elegance. Born in Sweden, she arrived in Hollywood in the 1920s and quickly became one of MGM's biggest assets. Her striking looks, haunting eyes, and quiet intensity made her the perfect star for the era's romantic dramas and intense melodramas. Garbo wasn't the type to seek the spotlight beyond her roles. In fact, she was famously private, shunning parties, avoiding interviews, and rarely engaging with Hollywood social circles. Her mystique only deepened the public's fascination with her. To fans, Garbo was this untouchable, almost otherworldly figure. To the industry, she was a jewel who commanded respect just by walking into a room. Joan Crawford, on the other hand, was almost the exact opposite. She came from a rougher background and clawed her way up the Hollywood ladder with relentless determination. Known for her fiery spirit and glamorous style, Crawford embraced the spotlight. She was famous for her strong work ethic, often pushing herself harder than anyone else on set. Joan's image was one of resilience and ambition. She wasn't content with being just a star. She wanted to be a queen of Hollywood. This drive made her one of MGM's top actresses as well, starring in countless box office hits and becoming a household name. Here's where the first cracks appeared. Garbo represented a rarefied, ethereal ideal of stardom, reserved, distant, almost untouchable. Crawford embodied grit and raw determination. They weren't just different actresses. They symbolized two very different types of fame. Both women competed for similar roles at MGM, but their approaches and reputations were night and day. Garbo's quiet grace contrasted with Crawford's bold, aggressive style. In a studio system built on star power, competition was fierce. The studio didn't just manage talent. It manufactured drama, often pitting stars against each other to boost publicity and ticket sales. Beyond their public personas, their personal lives were also very different. Garbo's life was shrouded in secrecy. She kept her romantic relationships private, rarely allowed anyone close. Crawford was more open, sometimes controversially so, especially in later years when her memoirs and biographies revealed tumultuous personal struggles. This contrast only deepened the divide, with Garbo's inscrutable nature making her difficult to read or understand, and possibly easier to resent by those who lived a more exposed Hollywood life. So when talk of Greta Garbo hating Joan Crawford came around, it wasn't just about simple jealousy. It was a clash of two worlds and two very different visions of what it meant to be a star in Hollywood's golden era. This story isn't just about two women who didn't get along. It's about what their feud reveals about the pressures, politics, and personas that defined old Hollywood. The tension was simmering long before any public incidents, fueled by their competing images, their contrasting personalities, and the cutthroat world around them. And what really ignited that simmering resentment is what we'll uncover next. The story of Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford's hatred didn't begin with a single explosive incident. Instead, it was a slow burn, starting with subtle tensions and clashes that soon morphed into outright dislike. Early on, their paths crossed in the high-stakes world of MGM, where the studio star system created an environment ripe for rivalries. Both actresses were under contract with MGM during the 1920s and 1930s, a time when the studio wielded immense power over actors' careers. MGM was famous for its stable of glamorous stars, but also fostered fierce competition behind the scenes. The studio knew how to play its cards, often pitting its talent against one another, creating a climate where jealousy and rivalry thrived. From the beginning, Garbo and Crawford represented two very different types of stars. Garbo's enigmatic aura and serious acting style contrasted sharply with Crawford's more approachable girl-next-door appeal. The difference in their public images sparked early tension. While Garbo was often seen as cold and aloof, Crawford was vivacious and fiercely ambitious, traits that didn't sit well with Greta's reserved personality. Their first real clashes reportedly occurred during overlapping projects, where casting decisions sometimes favored one over the other. It's said that Joan Crawford's rising popularity threatened Garbo's standing at MGM, especially as Crawford became known for her versatility and willingness to do anything to land a role. Rumors circulated that Garbo resented Crawford's persistence and boldness, viewing it as a threat to her carefully crafted image of sophistication and mystique. Moreover, gossip columns of the era fed the tension. Paparazzi and reporters caught on to the story of two top actresses who barely tolerated each other, fueling rumors that the feud was more than just professional rivalry. Tabloids hinted at cold shoulders, curt exchanges on set, and whispered insults backstage, though much of this was likely exaggerated for sensational headlines. But there was more beneath the surface. Garbo was notoriously private and selective about her friends and associates. Crawford, by contrast, was outgoing and hungry for social connection. This fundamental difference made it difficult for the two to find any common ground. Industry insiders speculated that Garbo viewed Crawford's outgoing nature as loud and abrasive, while Crawford likely saw Garbo as distant and dismissive. Another factor was their competition for the spotlight in a male-dominated studio system that pitted women against one another. MGM, while powerful, thrived on controlling its stars and sometimes encouraged rivalries to keep them in line and focus on their careers. Some insiders suggest that the studio played a role in amplifying the friction between Garbo and Crawford, subtly favoring one or the other at different times to manipulate public perception and create buzz. Behind the scenes, there were whispers of moments when Garbo outright refused to acknowledge Crawford's presence at events or on set. One anecdote claims that when Crawford once approached Garbo at a party, Greta simply turned away without a word. Such icy encounters became the stuff of Hollywood legend, making their dislike very public. Even if they rarely spoke openly about it, the early signs of their rivalry were a mix of personality clashes, competition for roles, and a studio system that pitted stars against each other. This volatile mix set the stage for something far more intense than simple professional jealousy. What really pushed their relationship over the edge, however, was a scandalous incident that fans have whispered about for decades. And it's this event that finally explains the deep-seated hatred Greta Garbo had for Joan Crawford. At the heart of Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford's bitter feud was more than just Hollywood competition. It was a fundamental clash of personalities that made any kind of friendship or mutual respect impossible. The tension between them was as much about who they were as people as it was about their careers. Greta Garbo was the quintessential enigma. Quiet, introspective, and intensely private, she carried an air of aloofness that few could penetrate. She was the ice queen of Hollywood, not just because of her cool demeanor, but because she deliberately kept everyone at arm's length. Garbo's reserved nature wasn't just a personal preference. It was part of her public persona, carefully maintained to enhance her mystique. She didn't do parties, rarely granted interviews, and was famously selective about her social circles. For Garbo, being a star meant being untouchable, a mysterious figure that audiences would endlessly wonder about. Joan Crawford, by contrast, was fire incarnate. She was outgoing, brash, and endlessly ambitious. Crawford wasn't content with just being a star. She wanted to dominate Hollywood. She worked tirelessly, pushing herself harder than anyone else to secure the spotlight. Where Garbo was subtle and reserved, Crawford was bold and relentless. She was known for her fierce work ethic and willingness to fight for every role and every opportunity. Her personality was magnetic, commanding attention wherever she went. This fundamental difference created friction. Garbo viewed Crawford's brashness as vulgar and unrefined, while Crawford saw Garbo's coldness as snobbish and dismissive. Each interpreted the other through a lens of disdain. Garbo's aloofness made her seem unapproachable and judgmental, and Crawford's fiery nature made her seem aggressive and insincere. But beneath the surface, professional jealousy simmered. Crawford's rise in Hollywood threatened Garbo's position as MGM's leading lady. Joan was willing to do whatever it took to stay relevant, including taking risks with roles that Garbo might have considered beneath her. This willingness made Crawford a formidable competitor, and Garbo, who prized control over her image, resented Crawford's less polished, more accessible appeal. Crawford's public image as a working-class success story also created tension. She was proud of her rough beginnings and embraced a more populist persona, which clashed with Garbo's more aristocratic and mysterious image. To Garbo, Crawford's aggressive self-promotion felt like a threat to the refined star ideal she cultivated. Hollywood insiders whisper that Garbo often viewed Crawford as too loud for the elite world of stardom she inhabited. Crawford's relentless ambition was something Garbo seemed to disdain, seeing it as desperation rather than drive. On the other hand, Crawford admired Garbo's star power but thought her aloofness was a facade, interpreting it as weakness or fear. Their personalities were so diametrically opposed that it was impossible for them to find common ground. They weren't just rivals on paper. They genuinely disliked each other, and that dislike grew with every passing year. It wasn't just competition, it was a battle of identities, a fight over what it meant to be a Hollywood star. This clash of personalities spilled over into their work. On sets where their paths crossed, tensions were palpable. Some crew members recalled moments when Garbo would refuse to engage with Crawford or when Crawford would make cutting remarks about Garbo's coldness. Neither woman made an effort to bridge the gap. And yet, this personality clash was only the surface of a deeper, more explosive feud, one rooted in a scandalous incident that shattered any remaining goodwill between them. While personality clashes and professional rivalry laid the groundwork for tension between Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford, what truly ignited the deep-seated hatred was a scandalous incident behind the scenes, one that fans and insiders had whispered about for decades, but only recently began to come into clearer focus. The story centers around a highly charged moment on an MGM set in the early 1930s, when both stars were at the peak of their fame. According to several accounts from crew members and studio insiders, Joan Crawford, known for her relentless drive, went too far in an attempt to secure a coveted leading role that was initially intended for Garbo. At the heart of this clash was a project MGM desperately wanted to promote, a romantic drama that relied heavily on Garbo's iconic presence to draw audiences. But Crawford, hungry for a chance to prove herself as a serious actress, aggressively lobbied studio executives to cast her instead. Her tactics reportedly included undermining Garbo's reputation and questioning her commitment to the project, exploiting Garbo's well-known preference for privacy and selectiveness as a weakness. The tension came to a head during a tense meeting called by studio heads to resolve the casting conflict. According to insiders, Joan didn't hold back, publicly criticizing Garbo's supposed unreliability and aloofness, framing her as difficult to work with and out of touch with the demands of Hollywood. The meeting ended with a bitter exchange of words, and Garbo, who rarely showed emotion publicly, was visibly shaken. But the real breaking point happened soon after. Rumors spread that Crawford, in a calculated move, leaked sensitive information about Garbo's personal life, details she had fiercely protected from the public eye, to gossip columnists. This betrayal was especially painful given Garbo's guarded nature. The idea that a fellow star would weaponize her privacy to gain an edge was unforgivable. What made the situation even more explosive was the involvement of the studio. MGM, always eager to stir controversy for publicity, didn't do much to contain the leak. In fact, some insiders believe the studio tacitly encouraged Crawford's actions to create buzz around their stars, even if it meant damaging personal relationships. Garbo's reaction was immediate and harsh. She cut off almost all contact with Crawford and reportedly refused to work on any projects that involved her. She became even more reclusive, retreating deeper into her private world as a way to shield herself from the fallout. The press picked up on the tension, but the real details remained hidden behind Hollywood's polished veneer. Gossip columns hinted at a feud, but no one dared publish the full story for fear of studio backlash. However, the damage was done. This incident not only destroyed any chance of friendship, but solidified a long-lasting hatred from Garbo toward Crawford. To Garbo, Crawford had crossed a line. using personal attacks and underhanded tactics to climb the ladder of success. It was a betrayal that no glamorous apology could fix. And yet, even as the public rarely got the full story, this explosive moment became a defining chapter in Hollywood history. It showed how ruthless and cutthroat the industry could be, where ambition sometimes pushed stars to betray one another in shocking ways. What followed was years of Cold War between the two actresses, an icy distance filled with silent hostility, whispered insults and avoidance. But that wasn't the whole story. The media played its own part in fanning the flames, shaping public perception of the feud in ways that only made it worse. The feud between Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford was already intense behind the scenes, but Hollywood's relentless media machine took it to another level. Gossip columns, studio publicity departments, and scandal-hungry reporters thrived on the tension between these two icons, turning a private rivalry into one of the most talked-about feuds of the Golden Age. In the 1930s and 1940s, Hollywood gossip was a powerful force. Magazines like Photoplay and newspapers' entertainment sections competed fiercely to uncover juicy stories about the stars. When whispers about Garbo and Crawford's dislikes started circulating, the press jumped on it, often exaggerating details or fabricating encounters to boost readership. Reporters loved the idea of two glamorous women, both at the top of their game, locked in a bitter battle. It made for irresistible headlines. Garbo snubs Crawford at gala, Crawford fires back at cold shoulder, and so on. These stories were carefully crafted to sell magazines and keep fans hooked. Even small slights or awkward moments were blown out of proportion and presented as evidence of a full-blown war. The studios themselves played a complicated role. MGM, always aware of the publicity potential, didn't discourage these stories. In fact, some insiders suggest the studios subtly encouraged reporters to fuel the feud. The drama kept the stars in the headlines, which translated into box office dollars. Public fascination with their rivalry ensured that both actresses remained relevant even when their careers faced challenges. Some rumors were pure invention, created to pit the two against each other even when no conflict existed. For example, stories circulated about secret meetings where Garbo allegedly demanded Crawford be fired or Crawford plotting to sabotage Garbo's roles. Neither of these were ever confirmed but became part of the mythology surrounding their feud. The press also played on their contrasting public images to dramatize the story. Garbo was portrayed as a cold, aloof diva, while Crawford was a fiery, ambitious underdog. This framing heightened the drama, giving audiences a clear narrative to follow. The icy queen versus the scrappy challenger. However, this media-fueled narrative had real consequences. It made reconciliation impossible, as both actresses became trapped in the roles the press assigned them. The constant spotlight on their feud pushed them further apart, each feeling the pressure to maintain their image, often by reinforcing their dislike of the other. The relentless media coverage also created a public perception that the hatred was all-consuming, even though, in reality, both women focused more on their careers and personal lives. But in Hollywood, perception often becomes reality, and the story of their feud overshadowed many of their professional achievements. Despite the exaggerated stories, some genuine moments of hostility did occur, and the media's amplification of these only deepened the rift. Fans eagerly consumed every snippet, every icy glance caught on camera, every slight gesture. This frenzy around their feud contributed to a culture in Hollywood where star rivalries became part of the entertainment itself. It set a precedent for future celebrity conflicts, showing how media could manipulate personal relationships for maximum drama. And yet, behind all the headlines and gossip, the personal cost of this manufactured feud was significant. Both women carried the weight of public expectation and private resentment. But what the media never fully revealed were the private conversations and insider perspectives that showed a far more complex and human side to their animosity. That's where the real story deepens, as those close to Garbo and Crawford reveal insights that go beyond tabloid sensationalism. While the public and media painted Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford's rivalry as a dramatic clash of icy hostility and fiery ambition, Those who actually knew them tell a more complicated story. Friends, colleagues, and insiders offer a glimpse behind the headlines, revealing that their hatred wasn't simply black and white. It was layered with personal pain, misunderstandings, and deep-rooted insecurities. Several close associates of Garbo describe her as fiercely loyal but incredibly sensitive. To those who earned her trust, she was warm and generous, but she guarded herself carefully. One betrayal was enough to close her off forever. The rumored incident where Crawford leaked details about Garbo's private life wasn't just a professional slight. For Garbo, it was a profound violation of trust. People close to her say that Greta rarely forgave those who crossed that line, and Crawford's actions cut deep. From Joan Crawford's side, friends often highlight her intense desire to prove herself, not just as a star, but as a woman who overcame a tough childhood and worked tirelessly for every bit of success. Joan's relentless ambition sometimes made her appear ruthless, but those who knew her well say she was also vulnerable and deeply insecure beneath that tough exterior. Some believe Joan resented Garbo's effortless grace and natural mystique, a quality Crawford felt she had to fight for every day. Interestingly, a few insiders suggest that there was a tragic misunderstanding at the heart of their feud. Garbo, naturally private, reportedly misinterpreted some of Crawford's aggressive career moves as personal attacks, while Crawford saw Garbo's distance as coldness and snobbery. What could have been a professional rivalry escalated because neither took the time, or perhaps didn't want, to understand the other's motivations or struggles. Studio employees from that era recalled tense moments on set where the atmosphere between Garbo and Crawford was electric, but also painfully awkward. Some crew members remember Joan making pointed comments about Greta's Ice Queen attitude, while others witnessed Garbo silently refusing to acknowledge Crawford's presence. But beyond the surface, many said they sensed a grudging respect beneath the animosity, a recognition that both women were survivors navigating a cutthroat industry. There are also accounts from people who worked closely with Crawford later in her career, suggesting that the bitterness toward Garbo never fully faded. Joan reportedly spoke bitterly about Garbo in private, accusing her of playing the victim and being manipulative. Yet, even in those moments, some say there was an underlying envy for Garbo's natural talent and enduring allure. On the other side, Garbo's few close confidants maintained that while she loathed what Crawford did, she also pitted her, a woman so consumed by ambition she couldn't find peace or happiness. Garbo's final years, spent in almost complete seclusion, seemed to reflect a desire to escape the drama and politics of Hollywood entirely. These insider perspectives reveal a feud far more human and complex than the tabloid caricature suggested. It wasn't just two stars clashing for fame. It was two women shaped by their past insecurities and the brutal realities of the studio system. Their hatred was as much about self-preservation as it was about genuine dislike. Understanding this added a layer of tragedy to their story. Two brilliant women trapped by the roles they played both on and off-screen, unable to break free from a rivalry that ultimately defined much of their public lives. The story of Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford's feud goes far beyond Hollywood gossip and tabloid sensationalism. It's a window into the intense pressures of stardom, the ruthless world of classic Hollywood studios, and the very human emotions behind the glamorous masks. Their hatred, while often portrayed as pure spite or jealousy, was rooted in a mix of personality clashes, professional competition, and deep personal wounds. Garbo's reserved mystique clashed with Crawford's fiery ambition, setting the stage for conflict. But it was that rumor betrayal, the leaking of private information, that turned simmering tension into outright hatred. What makes this feud so compelling isn't just the drama or the scandal. It's the way it highlights the cost of fame and the loneliness at the top. Both women were shaped by their past and haunted by insecurities, trapped in a system that often forced stars to compete rather than collaborate. Behind the scenes, they were more than rivals. They were women struggling to protect their identities in a harsh industry. The media's role in fanning the flames can't be understated either. By turning their rivalry into a public spectacle, Hollywood's pressed deep in the divide and shaped how generations would remember them. In many ways, the feud became a narrative tool, one that obscured their true talents and reduced two complex figures to caricatures locked in a bitter fight. But beneath the headlines, the story is tragic. Two women who could have shared understanding and perhaps even friendship instead became symbols of Hollywood's unforgiving nature. Garbo's retreat into privacy and Crawford's relentless drive both speak to the emotional toll this feud and the industry took on them. Today, reflecting on their rivalry encourages us to look beyond surface impressions and sensational stories. It reminds us that behind every public persona is a real person with fears, hopes, and vulnerabilities. The Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford feud is a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition unchecked by empathy and the consequences of a system that prizes fame over humanity. As viewers, it's worth wondering, how different might their stories have been if they had found common ground? Could their combined talents have changed Hollywood's landscape in ways we never imagined? Or was their feud an inevitable product of competitive, high-pressure environment? Whatever the answer, their story remains one of Hollywood's most fascinating and instructive dramas, an intense rivalry born from ambition, betrayal, and the complex realities of life under the spotlight. If you found this story as intriguing as I did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's most captivating tales. Thanks for watching.